Everybody, welcome back to this episode of the Catching Carbon podcast. And today we're excited to bring a little bit of a different platform. We have John May joining us from Hamilton Clark. He is the managing director. Hamilton Clark is an investment bank, and they are investing in technology startups with a focus on sustainability and early stage. And what I think is interesting is we've had quite a few of those startups on our show over the last 2 years. And even now, we've seen in the news over the last 2 weeks a lot of Series A investing, Series B investing, grants being announced, and it's exciting. You see the buzz on LinkedIn, you see the news articles, but I think it's a little bit of a black box for all of us, for our listeners. What actually goes into getting to that stage? What happens early on? Where does the investment come from? And John, we're excited to have you on and have you kind of walk us through that for our audience. So thank you for joining us. Excited for you to be here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I think it's great. It's not an alternative vehicle, but you're an investment bank, not a venture capital fund. So you're not necessarily looking to take equity and do full raises with companies, even though there are maybe early stage startup, Series A level, Series B level, but you're more providing a different vehicle for funding for some of these things. So, but hopefully what we get to unpack during all of this conversation is, what kind of companies should be seeking out Hamilton Clark? Are you looking for? What kind of investments maybe have you already made, if you can disclose any of those type of things? That'd be great. So, I'm going to kind of start there. Just give us kind of maybe your background and really the background of Hamilton Clark in that backdrop of, this is kind of companies that we're looking for.
Sure. So I've been an investment banker for about 25 years. I started with Bank of America, and then I moved to St. Louis and joined a firm called Stern Brothers. And then in 2016, I moved to Hamilton Clark Sustainable Capital. There's kind of an interesting origin story to Hamilton Clark. Our founder, John McKenna, was a partner at the famous or infamous Lehman Brothers. And he was head of the Houston office. And back then he was working on oil and gas. And to his great credit, when he left Lehman at the height of the financial crisis, he decided to, take what he had learned at Lehman and create a new investment bank on Wall Street that would focus exclusively on sustainability and decarbonization. So what does that mean? As you were indicating in our introduction, we raise equity and project financing for early stage technology companies in a wide variety of sectors in sustainability and decarbonization. And specifically, we do three things at the firm. The first thing that we do is we raise equity for these early stage technology companies at the corporate level. And that's really important because that's how early stage technology companies get the capital to mature and evolve their technologies to the point where they're over time going to become ready for commercial scale deployment. And that's really the biggest thing that we're trying to accomplish in the sustainability and decarbonization sector is we're trying to find new ways of decarbonizing almost every aspect of every industry. And so, it typically takes 2 or 3 rounds of equity. You mentioned Series A, Series B, Series C equity rounds. That's what we call the rounds. And most companies who've invented their own decarbonization technology in whatever industry it is, it takes them several rounds of equity and several years, in fact, to get to the point where they're ready to deploy the technology, use the technology, at commercial scale. The second thing we do then is, coincidentally, gentlemen, is we raise first commercial scale project financing. What do I mean by that? We raise the development equity, as it's called, to pay for engineering and design and other so-called pre-final investment decision items. And that's called development equity. And that's what you need to raise if you're going to develop your first project. You need an engineering firm to work with you to design the project. And then the third thing that we do is we raise first commercial scale project financing. And the reason that I call it first commercial scale is there are so many industries that are decarbonizing for the first time. Many of these early stage technology companies are enabling different industries to develop a decarbonized approach to the way that they operate, whether it's fuels, chemicals, products, power, new materials, recycling, waste to energy, and so forth. So there's almost an infinite number of subsectors, if you want to call it that, within sustainability, where every industry is basically trying to catch carbon and not let it get into the atmosphere. And the other way of stating that is decarbonizing their operations. And so I think one of the things that I'm the most proud of being at Hamilton Clark is the fact that we're a firm that is not afraid of helping our clients scale up their technologies for the first time. We don't see Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and Citibank doing first commercial scale projects or first of a kind projects.
So what does that look like for the company? I mean, are you taking, you're calling it the development equity, are you taking an equity stake, or is this more of a collateralized loan? You know, you being an investment bank versus being a venture capital fund. What's the difference there? How do you kind of dissect that?
No, that's a great question. I should have explained that. So Hamilton Clark is a classic broker-dealer investment bank like Goldman or Citi or Morgan Stanley. The big difference is our emphasis is completely on sustainability and decarbonization. So we go out, let's say an early stage tech company hires Hamilton Clark. We will go out to about 400 so-called institutional investors. These are firms that you're familiar with, like private equity, venture capital, environmental, social, and governance funds, impact funds like the Bill Gates Breakthrough Ventures, and then a host of so-called infrastructure funds who are interested in project financing. BlackRock has an infrastructure fund. Macquarie out of Australia has an infrastructure fund. And these infrastructure funds increasingly are becoming more focused on renewables and sustainability. And so that's where you get the money for project financing. And finally, we're seeing more and more incumbent players in various industries, oil and gas, chemicals, industries that have been around for decades that are, have a history of carbonizing the world and allowing carbon to emit into the atmosphere. And they are finally, after decades, actively seeking early stage technologies that they can use to start to curtail their emissions. And so that's a big part of what we do as well, is we work with early stage tech companies who have these new technologies for decarbonization. And then we go out and raise the money for the early stage technology companies from the incumbent strategic players like oil and gas and chemical companies and other strategics in various industries who are desperately looking to decarbonize, but don't necessarily have the time to figure out how to decarbonize their own business. And it's the early stage tech companies who are almost continuously inventing new ways to decarbonize these old industries. And so it's actually a great coming together of early stage tech companies and traditional established companies to create the decarbonization pathways that we're seeing in almost every industry.
So I'm an early stage startup in some kind of flue capture technology. I come to John May, Hamilton Clark, and say, we want to engage you to help us raise money. You're essentially casting a wide net to your network of 400 industrial funds. They say, some of them say, interesting technology, I want to be a part of that. You're kind of brokering that deal, if I'm understanding this correctly. Is it an equity? Is it fund now? You're kind of establishing a fund or various levels of funding, but is it an equity stake or is it a loan?
Well, good question. So again, we're going out to institutional investors to raise money for these early stage technology companies. And let me define institutional investors. On a very basic level, an institutional investor is simply somebody who has at least $50 million of capital under management, and they have an ability to invest that capital in various technologies in different industries and in different parts of the world. And when we go out to 400 of those investors, each of which has $50 million in capital under management at any one time, that means there's billions of capital that are seeking opportunities to invest in the early stage technologies. And we are a broker. We're an intermediary between the early stage technology company and the institutional investor. And we bring the two together and hopefully get a commitment from the institutional investor or investors that they're going to invest equity or project financing in each one of these individual companies. And that's what investment banking in sustainability is all about, is bringing the parties together, bringing the technology together with the money so that these technology companies can grow and end up becoming mature companies that are decarbonizing various industries.
So it sounds like you almost have to split it between when you're very early stage and maybe you're flue capture Jeff. And flue capture Jeff is developing his technology to capture flue gas. You're probably giving up an equity position, it sounds like, as your company. But then when we get into large projects, if we go downstream to oil and gas or to the cement industry, you can also finance those projects through debt. So you're kind of able to do both. You're maybe giving up some equity. Yeah, it's interesting. Does that seem accurate?
Well, let me just add one thing. Yeah, it is accurate. But when you do project financings, when we do project financings, there's two stages. And I'll just keep this brief. I don't want to bore the audience. But one of the biggest issues that we face globally is how do we raise money to get these first-of-a-kind projects built? And to do that, when a client says, we've got a brand new whiz-bang technology for decarbonizing a particular sector, but we've never demonstrated it or built it at scale, we don't see Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and Citibank doing first-of-a-kind projects. They don't want to have to go out to institutional investors and raise what's called development equity, which is used to pay for engineering and design of the project. This is the first time that this particular technology has been attempted to be used at commercial scale. And so there's a lot of risk associated with scaling up a first-of-a-kind technology. But here's the interesting part for your listeners, if I might say. we raised the development equity to pay for the engineering and design. And then once the design is ready for construction, we raise the construction financing. But the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems in sustainability, is many of the early stage technology companies, when they build their first commercial scale project, the project doesn't work at the so-called nameplate capacity or nameplate level. So if I'm going to build a hydrogen or a sustainable aviation fuel project, and I get the money from Hamilton Clark through institutional investors, and then let's say the project is built by the developer and the contractor, and they turn it on and it only works at 50% of the intended capacity. What do we do then? Well, this actually happened to me, gentlemen, when I was working in sustainable aviation fuels at the beginning of that entire sector, and this would have been about 10 years ago. I got a chance to work for the first two sustainable aviation fuel projects in the United States. And the names are not important, but I'll mention them. Fulcrum Bioenergy and Red Rock Bioenergy. And both projects, when they were built by the contractor and turned on, neither one of the projects worked at the intended overall capacity. They were both only working at something like 50% of capacity. And so I came home to my wife and I said, this was when I was younger. And I said,
you don't talk to her anymore?
I said, my career is over.
I've had a few of those days.
And she said, John, we need the money to pay for college and grad school. Get back out there. You're already dirty and sweaty. Figure it out. And so I'm joking, of course, but that actually happened. She said, get yourself out there and figure out a way to do it. So I'll finish this point in the conversation quickly by saying I started talking to insurance companies in New York City because I traveled a lot there earlier in my career. And I was talking to an insurance guy in New York at the Oyster Bar in Grand Central Station, and I told him about my problem, and he said, you're making a big deal out of nothing. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the insurance industry can create an insurance policy that a developer of a sustainable technology can buy for a reasonable premium, just like you'd buy life insurance. And what the technology risk insurance policy will do is, if you're working with a project and they're willing to buy a policy to protect themselves in case the project doesn't work, then here's what the policy will do. The policy will provide capital from the insurance company to the developer to work with the contractor to fix the project and then make it work at commercial scale. But if that doesn't work, I'll finish my point. If that doesn't work, if the contractor and the developer can't make the project work at 100% of scale, let's say it's working at 70% of scale, and that's the best anybody can make it do, then the technology risk insurance nowadays will provide capital to pay off the debt portion. You were referring to the debt portion earlier. Will pay off the debt portion of the project finance capital stack, and that prevents the commercial bank or private credit lender from foreclosing on the debt and taking the project away from the developer, and it preserves the ownership in the hands of the original developer and gives the original developer another bite at the apple, typically with another contractor that's more proficient. But that technology risk insurance answers the biggest question in sustainability, in my opinion, and that is, private equity, venture capital, ESG, impact, and infrastructure funds are worried about one thing more than anything else, and this is global. What if we invest in an early stage technology company in decarbonization and it's built and it doesn't work? Then we're going to lose money as a private equity, venture capital, et cetera type firm. We're going to be embarrassed. We meaning the people that work for the private equity, venture capital, et cetera type firms, could lose their jobs. So I'll finish this off quickly by saying, I want to give you an anecdote that brings this all together, and then I'll turn it back to you for more questions. I went to the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy's loan programs office, did a seminar and conference in New York City at the World Trade Center a year ago last November. And they asked me to speak on first commercial scale sustainable aviation fuel project financing. I got up, I did my speech, I got some nice applause, and then there were 5 private equity guys that got up there that couldn't have been older than 25 years old. And to a person, each one of them said, we are afraid of taking technology scale-up risk. We want to wait till the technology has already been scaled and de-risked. And then some guy in the back raised his hand, and I said, yes, sir, what's your question? He said, what good are you to the global economy if you're not willing to take risk to decarbonize our world? And to me, that said it all. That was a dramatic moment where the short-term interests of various private equity and venture capital people to try to make money and to try to make sure that they get paid has to be sublimated to the overall initiative of decarbonizing our planet and catching all this carbon so that we don't end up overheating the planet. And I think that's the biggest misconception that continues to be out there, is that the funds and the investors that we are counting on to put the money into these early stage technologies are still very worried about scale up risk, technology risk. And for that reason, it's very difficult to get them to invest. And so there's a tug of war between the early stage technology companies and these institutional investors in basically trying to come together. And this doesn't happen often enough, not nearly. I would say less than 50% of the time that we go out to raise capital, do we actually successfully raise the capital for an individual early stage technology company. That's how difficult it is. It has nothing to do with politics or who's in the office of the president. It has to do with this continuing dialectic between early stage tech companies and investors trying to figure out how they can work together.
You know, it sounds like at the end of the day, you're doing the heavy lifting for, essentially these startups that they don't have the bandwidth or the network or the reach to get in front of 20, 30, 40 different investors or potential investors, and you have a 50% success rate yourself in raising those funds, so they're just better off on doing that. So utilizing your services. But given that, what kind of, go back to just food capture startup, what size do I need to be, or what amount of money that makes sense? I mean, I need $1 million to build a prototype. Am I a candidate for your services, or do I need to have already gotten through that phase? I need $5 million to build out I've got a
pilot plans, or
a pilot plan, exactly. Or $10 million. Like where are your kind of tranches or thresholds that make sense to somebody that would want to kind of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of the early stage technology companies that we work with start out and they raise what I call walking around money for short. They typically raise money from friends and family or from high net worth individuals that they might know in their city or from family offices. And so most companies raise roughly $1 million or $2 from those types of more friendly, more personable investors. And they get their They get their website established. They hire a management team. They get going, basically. And then they come to Hamilton Clark when they're ready to do the Series A equity round. And what we found is that if we don't go out to the market for at least $5 million for that early stage tech company, then the institutional investor market isn't really interested in, and this goes back to their mindset, they're not interested in spending their time unless they can write a check of at least $5 million, because their time is valuable, just like everyone's. And so I would say the typical Series A equity round is somewhere between 5 million and I think we've seen some carbon direct removal companies that advertise that they can take carbon directly out of the air. And those are kind of sexy companies that we're seeing. We saw a company, I'm not going to name the name, but we saw a company that raised $40 million last year just as a Series A because it was one of the first direct air capture companies in the U.S. But I would say the typical early stage technology company across all sectors in sustainability starts out with a Series A round of somewhere between $5 million and $20 million.
Yeah, our friends over there at Heirloom, they're direct air capture, but they did the Series B last week. I think it was last week. Right? $150 million raise on the Series B. Outstanding. Great for that.
Breakthrough just invested $40 million into Deep Sky. We've had Phil on the podcast. That was this last week too.
Right.
So as you mentioned, the Breakthrough Energy Fund. But yeah, it is that makes sense. That 5 to 20 because we are seeing some rather large Series Bs. I can't remember. 12 also recently closed around at like $650 million, but I want to say that might have been a C, maybe a little more mature.
Okay.
But these what is being raised is meaningful amounts of money. And maybe I think what's interesting, and John, you might find this. We're not investing into SaaS businesses that are high margin and low overhead. These are manufacturing businesses. We are building and these meaningful project sizes, infrastructure to capture CO2. You can't do that with a web platform. And so I would imagine the investment profile is much different than it would be for SaaS, for traditional like VC style investment. And I imagine there's greater risk with that as well.
Absolutely true.
We talked a lot about carbon capture side of it, and obviously that's kind of our forte, but you're in sustainability. So I assume when you're talking e-fuels, SAF, you're also in hydrogen. So if I'm a hydrogen company, I've got a new fuel cell or a new electrolysis or solid oxide type of technology that I'm kind of in my Series A funding, I should call you. Any other verticals? Hydrogen, CO2, electric vehicles. Is that a vertical that you're looking at? Batteries, things like that.
Absolutely, all of the above. Anything that's remotely sustainable, that's decarbonizing any industry is what we're about. And so, yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. And that's why I was excited about the Catching Carbon podcast, because I guess my main message is there are so many opportunities to decarbonize all these industries. In a way, we can't possibly get to all of this, immediately. We're going to have to work for decades, I think. You mentioned hydrogen and SAF. Those are sexy industries that you go on LinkedIn or on the internet, and every day there's a new announcement by a new company that's doing some kind of decarbonization of SAF or of hydrogen or methanol or ammonia or any one of a number of other fuels, chemicals, products, materials. Almost every product or source of energy is being reinvented in a decarbonized way. And some of these energy and products have to take years to get to the point where they can actually achieve meaningful decarbonization rather than what I would call a token decarbonization. And so as the oil and gas complex and the large-scale chemical complex continues to do their work so that people can drive their cars and have the chemicals they need to live their lives, there's this entire other world going on, which is early-stage tech companies slowly but surely finding ways to decarbonize all of these other activities that have been going on for decades, if not centuries.
Brings me to my last question. You talk about all the opportunities.
I got last question because I'm going to throw my hardball.
Okay, perfect. Well, then I was
Softballs.
going to say, you got 2 hardballs coming in a row, but you might throw harder than me.
Yeah.
John, you're seeing a lot of opportunity, and you're a broker. So do you personally, does Hamilton Clark have to believe in the idea that they're being pitched, or do you leave that up to all of the institutional investors that come forward, and your job is to serve it up and let them make their decision? Where do you land personally and as Hamilton Clark when an idea hits your desk?
A number of the partners at our firm have engineering backgrounds, and so I think we do rely on those people in the firm who really understand how these technologies work from an engineering and chemistry standpoint. And so we definitely gravitate toward bringing those partners in the firm onto calls with these early stage technology companies. So we, as an investment bank, can try to understand as best as possible exactly how the technology works, what differentiates it from other similar technologies. And I think what we're constantly looking for are the best in class of a particular way of reinventing how something is made, whether it's power, fuels, chemicals, materials, products, recycling, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not saying we're, a firm like McKinsey or some think tank firm that actually is an engineering powerhouse. We're trying to blend engineering in finance and finance together to try to find the best companies to work for. And then there's a journey that we go on with each of the companies as we go through raising different rounds of capital for them, where we learn more, we see how their technology evolves. Sometimes it evolves straight up to the moon, but sometimes it takes a more choppy path. And so there's a lot of anxiety involved in this business in hoping that these early stage founders will make it all the way to commercial scale. In a way, it's like a movie, and you're hoping that the movie is going to have a happy ending, but it doesn't always have a happy ending.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so we know you got a hard stop too, so we want to be cognizant of your time. But last question, we got new administration coming in, a whole new cabinet, whole new mindset, maybe on funding and government subsidies and things like that. Do you have a crystal ball, and where do you land today on what's the funding market look like today? What's the equity market look like today for some of these technologies with the uncertainty on 45Z or 45Q and the Inflation Reduction Act, things like that? So real quick on that, what's your crystal ball? In the air,
Doge, government efficiency, all this. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Like, where do you think this lands? And is it impacting, more specifically to the question, is it impacting the investment community right now while we wait and see?
Well, I'll say 2 quick things because I know we have to finish up. The Inflation Reduction Act was a statute passed by Congress. So I don't think that the new president can wave his hand and basically make that go away. I think that's still there. But on the flip side, as you pointed out, the Section 45 tax credits that are available for different types of fuels, as we've talked about, hydrogen, SAF, et cetera, the guidance from the government has to be finalized so that developers understand what the eligibility criteria is to be able to use one of those tax credits as an economic incentive to add revenue to the offtake contract that is, buying the hydrogen or buying the SAF. They want additional incremental revenue, and they're using the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, and the verb is monetize. They monetize or sell those tax credits to people like Bill Gates, who buys the tax credits. And that's how many of these companies and technologies are able to make profits on even the very early stage technologies that they're working on. And so that's a really important part, but we need the guidance on those Section 45 credits to be finalized by the IRS. And once they are, I don't think it doesn't make any difference who's in the White House. We'll continue to utilize those credits to incentivize decarbonization.
I think 45V was supposed to be secured by the end of last week. I haven't seen positively or negatively, but I think hydrogen was supposed to. But real quick, and we'll let you go. Is this impacting? Are you seeing a kind of a wait and see on investment right now until we get that clarity, or
checks being written? Yeah,
or checks being written. Here we go.
Absolutely, checks are being written.
That's all we need.
Good news right there. Well, John, this is awesome. Really informative, John. Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.